There is an issue that not enough people are talking about in wrestling, one that is occasionally mentioned but never seriously considered as the major issue that it is. This issue is the lack of a heavyweight class for women in wrestling. This is really bad in a way I don't think people fully understand, so I'll try and break this down. Weight classes exist so that all people, not just those blessed with large person genetics, can compete in fair matches. Spencer Lee, for instance, would have no chance versus Geno Petriashvili, no matter how hard he trained, as a heavyweight Geno would train hard too. Thus, lighter weights have their own weight classes so that matches are fair in terms of size, and heavyweights, the largest athletes, still of course can't compete, but in their own category. Weight classes exist so that athletes, no matter how big or small, can still wrestle. So it is bizarre to me that unlike men's freestyle and men's Greco, women's freestyle does not let female heavyweights wrestle, as the heaviest a female wrestler can be and still be allowed to compete is 76 kilos or 168 pounds. That is really light. I just want to break it down and try and fully contextualize how light that is. The average weight for an adult man in the US is just under 200 pounds. This puts the average man neatly into the 92 kilo freestyle class. Obviously, this is far higher than the average wrestler due to high obesity rates in America. Wrestlers, on account of being physically active, are not morbidly obese in any sense of the word. The point is, though, both higher and lower weight classes exist for the average man. But the average weight for an adult woman in America is 170 pounds. The highest weight in women's wrestling is 168 pounds. For the average American man in a wrestling tournament, you need weigh in at not the heaviest weight class, not even the second heaviest weight class, except for Greco, but the third heaviest weight class. Put the average American woman in a wrestling tournament and she'd bust weight. I repeat, the average. Not the top 10%, not the top 25%. The woman in the 50th percentile in America would weigh in at a wrestling tournament and bust weight. Over half of all American women would be too heavy to wrestle. Period. Only 44% would be light enough to even weigh in at any weight class. For men, it's 95%. Like I said before, the reason these numbers are so high is American obesity, but for both men and women in America, they have roughly analogous obesity rates. So the difference should be minimal. It should not be this bad. But it is. Consider that for men's Greco, the heaviest weight class is heavier than the lightest one by 236%. For men's freestyle, it's 219% because for some reason they're different. But for women's freestyle, it's only 152% difference between the lightest weight class and the heaviest. That would be like the men's freestyle weight classes only going up to 86 kilos. No 92, no 97, no 125 kilo weight class. Greco would only go up to 86.35 kilos. So the 97 and 130 weight classes don't exist outright. I'll get into what exactly that means and what is meant for women's wrestling, but I think that I have easily shown that the upper limit of 76 kilos is far too light for female wrestlers to be considered a heavyweight class in the same manner that 125 and 130 kilo are for the male counterparts. I don't know why women don't have a heavyweight class. I really don't. Why when Fila was creating the inaugural women's wrestling weight classes in the late 80s, they didn't add a true heavyweight class. I don't know why they didn't add one when it got accepted as an Olympic sport in Athens 2004. I can't even think of a remotely plausible reason they might not have done so. Can't even bust out the tinfoil hat and red string. It's not the norm in other combat sports not to give women a heavyweight class. Judo, wrestling's sister sport, has always had a female unlimited heavyweight class since the first Women's Judo World Championship in 1980, and that has stayed the same through its Olympic debut in 1992 up until today. Olympic Taekwondo has only 4 weight classes for each gender, but you best believe one of them is for heavyweight. Weightlifting may not be a combat sport, but it does have weight classes. And it has, you guessed it, a women's unlimited heavyweight class. Stepping outside the Olympic sphere, you have a weight class sport like powerlifting. And while there are many different federations, each with different weight classes, they have one thing in common: a women's heavyweight class at the top end. The other popular grappling sport, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, same thing, whether you're talking IBJJF, ADCC, gi, or no gi. Pretty much every single legitimate weight class system that involves women has a true women's heavyweight class, except, for some reason, wrestling. As it stands, there is a non-insignificant population of women that simply cannot wrestle under the current weight class system. These are not morbidly obese women, just naturally so tall and large that even when in shape, they cannot or at least have severe difficulty making 167.5 pounds. It's not just population statistics, I have empirical evidence. The US has women's collegiate freestyle wrestling, and while they don't have an unlimited heavyweight class, they do have a 207 upper limit, which is almost 40 pounds heavier than UWW's. But there's a problem. What to do when these 207-pound women try and qualify for UWW events like the Ranking Series, Pan Ams, or the World Championships? Well, they don't. Last year, 3 out of the 4 semifinalists at the 2025 National Championships didn't even bother to show up to that year's US Open, likely because they couldn't make 168. The champion at 207, Tristan Kelly, did go and cut all the way down to 76 kilos, but she got pinned in the round of 16. How could she not? Odds are she was cutting at least 20 to 30 pounds to get there, and that's assuming that she's a fairly light 207. The person she lost to wasn't even a top talent at the weight, and she got teched in 30 seconds in the following round. The effectively U23 champion got crushed under the weight of, the weight, or rather lack of it. As I'm writing this video, Tristan Kelly defended her 207-pound title in the inaugural D1 NCAA National Championships, looking, like a 207-pounder. Time will tell if she'll do well at 168 pounds at the US Open, if she even bothers to compete. Her fellow 207-pound others, and all others like her are effectively doomed. They are too big to succeed, oftentimes even make the heaviest weight class, and thus have no options to continue in the sport. With pretty much every other weight class system mess up, at least the best athletes can move up in weight, go out there and wrestle, even if at a severe size disadvantage. Even if they would lose, at least they could lace up their shoes and try. But these women can't even do that. But to try and give full context to not only what this means, but what it has meant for women's wrestling, imagine if men's freestyle and Greco-Roman had the same weight class structure as women's freestyle did. I mentioned earlier that given the lightest weight class 57 kilos, the proportionality means that the heaviest weight class that would ever exist would be around 86 kilos. Anything higher than that would never have existed. But I know that there is evidence that women's have less physical variation than men, thus their lightweights are relatively heavier and the heavyweights relatively lighter, so I'm going to be generous and consider what the history of men's freestyle and men's Greco-Roman would be if they didn't have just the heavyweight class. But still, the results would be huge. Alexander Medved would never have moved up to heavyweight to win a record 10 world-level championships. Bruce Baumgartner would never have gone on his run of 13 consecutive world-level medals, as it would have been too big for the sport. Alexander Karelin would not have gone on his 12-year reign of terror, as he literally would have outgrown the sport by the age of 15. And neither would Gardner have ever risen to the challenge of beating him in the biggest upset in wrestling history, and still probably would have been a dairy farmer his whole life, having no reason to pursue a sport where he would have to cut that much weight past college. Names like Taha Aghul, Gable Stevenson, and Geno Petriashvili would never have done the sport that would win them and their country Olympic golds. Mihan Lopez would never have won his historic 5 Olympic gold medals, making him one of the greatest Olympic athletes in history. But because there is a true heavyweight class in male wrestling, they could, but there isn't one for women. The female equivalents of Baumgartner, Karelin, and Lopez never wrestled, no matter if they wanted to or not. Their stories are forever unwritten, what-ifs that never could have been. It's too late for them, but it's not too late for this next generation of female wrestlers. All UWW has to do is create a women's heavyweight class, even though one hasn't existed before in wrestling. But how to do it? Well, there are many ways to solve the issue, but the easiest one is simple. Just get rid of the 57 kilo weight class, bump 55 kilos up to 56 kilos, then add a weight class well above 76 kilos. While I could talk about open weight classes for all the styles, that's a subject for another video. But if UWW wants to keep the heavyweight class bounded, then they can pick a nice round number like 100 kilos to put as the upper limit. Odds are, like 125 kilos for men's freestyle, most wrestlers won't be at this limit, but it's there all the same. With this combined solution, women of pretty much all sizes can wrestle, and the lower weights are also decluttered as a nice bonus. Given the current Olympic weight classes set to 6 per style, the new women's Olympic weight classes can be 50, 56, 62, 68, 78, and 100 kilos. 53 kilos is the worst Olympic weight class anyway, so I doubt anyone will miss its relevance. There are two real counter-arguments for this creation of a 100 kilo weight class. One is that in many countries, they won't be able to get women big enough to fit, and the other is that the weight class will be a boring fat fest. I have two counters to that. First, the first argument. Some countries might have too much small genetics to get a woman large enough to wrestle at 100 kilos. To that, I have to say is judo. I've mentioned judo before as a combat sport with an unlimited female heavyweight class, but I didn't fully get into the top countries. A quick look will tell you that no matter what you think the genetics are for that region, national teams can still have competitive women's heavyweights. Take Japan. Small people, low average height and weight. But they have female heavyweights. Good ones, too. Akira Son won the Olympics in 2021, and Mao Arai is currently ranked as 6th best judoka in the world at a plus 78 kilo weight class. How about Korea? Also small, also short. Current rankings 1 and 3, and Hyun Kim is the reigning world champion. Really, every country that's good at judo, and even some that aren't, have plus 78 competitors in the top 300, and many with judoka far higher than that. So if anybody is going to go and make the argument that some countries can't get women big enough to compete at a weight class well above 76 kilos, they need to pick a better argument. As odds are, if whatever country they're using as an example care about women's sports to begin with, then they probably have at least a pretty good heavyweight judoka that are heavier than the limit I'm suggesting. The other argument I can foresee is that all matches will be super boring pushing contests, and that will be an embarrassment to wrestling, so there shouldn't be a women's heavyweight. I don't think that something being somewhat boring is a reason to disenfranchise a decent percentage of the female population from participating in the sport, as if I did, I'd advocate for Greco weight class to 77 kilos. But I'm supremely confident that that wouldn't happen. In fact, I have proof. Last year at the WNCAA Women's Wrestling Tournament, the heaviest weight class was 207 pounds. I was curious as to the points scored per minute, or as UWW likes to call it, efficiency. So I calculated the efficiency of the 207-pound weight class. I looked at the finals, semifinals, quarterfinals, and round of 16, taking count of all the total scores and divided them by all the match times to get a WQ number. You can look at my calculations below, but I got a WQ of just over 1.7, which means that 1.7 points on average were scored each minute. That might seem low, but if you look at the efficiency of the 2025 Senior World Championship, that puts it just under the average of 1.8 points per minute, neatly in between men's freestyle 97 kilos and men's freestyle 92 kilos in terms of points per minute. Mind you, I didn't count the earlier rounds, where blowouts are more likely to happen, so this number may well be an underestimation of the total efficiency, and the real number is higher. If you still think such a thing would be too boring to watch, then be consistent when any of these weight classes go on. Turn off your phone, TV, or whatever. In conclusion, women's wrestling needs a real heavyweight class. It's not a hard problem to solve. Just add a 100 kilo weight class and fiddle with the others to keep the number of weight classes to 10. I'd imagine the reason UWW hasn't made a female heavyweight class, even though every other weight class sport has one, is that they'd be moving into real uncharted territory, as a female weight class wasn't built into this sport at its inception in the late 80s. But just because something hasn't been done, doesn't mean it shouldn't. And creating a female heavyweight class, I think, is something that really should. Too many women can't participate in this sport for this reason for me to possibly think otherwise.